Welcome back, viewers. This is Next 5 Minutes. Today we're going to discuss divine timing. Now, for those of you who have been following me for a while, you're asking, Abrams, why are you still covering divine timing? Well, for many years I've been asking God, why does divine timing take so long? I would say, Father, don't you see how taking a long time to move in our lives will cause some people to lose faith, maybe worship other gods, or take matters into their own hands and try to become their own God? I believe what I have to share with you today is a direct response to that question. Let's not take a long time to set up. Let's jump right in. If we are waiting for God to give us something, we are waiting for his divine timing. No problem there. When God gives us whatever that thing is that we're waiting for, it comes into divine time. That is where we are now. Finally, if we're not waiting on God for any reason, for anything in our lives, we're in eternity. Divine time is not scriptural, but it does help me to understand how to best explain this. God's divine time involves waiting. You could be waiting for a husband, a wife, a new car, a home, a job, children, good health, what have you. The problem we often face is we're using our understanding of time to gauge divine timing. This is the struggle. Our application of time comes from the ancient Egyptians who created it thousands of years ago. But this is not how God sees time. We will cover that before we are through today. But what if I told you we measure the events in our lives by the passing of time in one or two ways which are driven by our emotions? If the event is favorable to us, we see it as effective. And if it is not favorable, we see it as exact. For example, if you live in San Francisco and you sat in traffic, you know that you sat there for exactly 16 minutes. That is exact time. But if I asked you, how long did it take to drive that same car home when you first bought it? You wouldn't remember. That is effective time. Or if you ever called customer service and the situation worked out to your liking, you wouldn't remember how long the call took because it worked. It was effective. But if you had a customer service call and it did not work out for you, you know that you stayed on that line for 38 minutes and 32 seconds. You see that? Exact time. So we measure the event in our lives effectively or exactly. Divine time is where we are now as we face the future. Divine timing is the future facing us in the form of events orchestrated by God for our good. Divine. Now this is interesting. Whatever we get from God must bring him, capital H, glory. Let's say someone wanted to be rich and famous, but God knows that this person with their current mindset would become a god, lowercase g, to their many fans. He might bring you what you desire, but not before setting a series of events that will draw you closer to him. He might also bring you a series of events that would better prepare you for this big future that you desire. This is all a part of divine timing. So God sees time through a series or sequence of events. But I have to prove this to you. Let's go back to the beginning. God says, let there be light. He divides the light from the darkness. The light he calls day and the darkness he calls night. This is the first day. Do you see that? There was a sequence of events followed by the closing of that day. The Bible does not say that God worked for 8 hours or the first shift or the second shift. The events and then the end of that day. You might say, yes, but that's a one-off. You remind me of that Bond villain, Goldfinger. He said, Mr. Bond, they have a saying in Chicago, once is happenstance, twice is coincidence, the third time is enemy action. That's a good quote by a bad guy. What he's saying is people in Chicago are not fickle. They need to see an event take place at least 3 times for them to believe that it is intentional and to accept it as a pattern. And statistically, Chicagoans are right. But I don't think New Yorkers apply statistics to potentially difficult situations. I don't know of any New Yorker who received a slight from someone and stood there long enough for the person to repeat that slight 2 more times. Because the first thing you said about my mother is the last thing you said about my mother. Okay, but I'm going too far ahead. Let's go back to the beginning. After the first day, God continues creation via a sequence of events. And at the conclusion of these events, he closes the second day. He does this a 3rd time. Now we have the pattern, but he continues to do it 3 additional times for 6 straight days. And then we know that on the 7th day, he took a rest. As an aside, I think that's awesome. It's amazing. God creates existence, but he also is humble enough to tell us that he had to take a rest. Okay, so now we understand how God sees time. But before we move on, let's bring some concepts together. Churches often cover the woman with the issue of blood. If you're not familiar with this story, there's this woman who's had this issue of blood for 12 years until that fateful day when she touches the hem of Jesus' garment. She was healed in that moment. Question: how long did the woman with the issue of blood live after she received her healing? Remember, I told you that if something is not advantageous to us, we measure it in exact time. That's the 12 years. But the answer is, we don't know how long she lived after she was healed, because now her life is effective, or it's measured in effective time. Okay, next question. How long did this woman live before she had the issue of blood? We don't know. That period of her life must have been effective as well. Okay, this is the second example with the prophets of Baal. There's a showdown on Mount Carmel which saw Elijah and the Almighty God against Ahab and 450 of Baal's prophets. The contest was to find out which God was better. Baal's prophets go first, and they set up their offering and petition Baal to send fire to consume the offering, because that would prove that he is the better God. So Baal's prophets prayed to him. They shouted his name. They cut themselves until their blood flowed, because that's how they worshiped him, right? They did this from morning through the afternoon into the evening, and he never responded. These prophets failed to raise their God. All they did was transition from failure to failure through the very day that God created. And there's a message here too. You could be up against incredible odds. Elijah not only contended with the 450 prophets of Baal, he was also up against King Ahab and Queen Jezebel. And we know Elijah still wins the day that the Lord has made. The contest ends with Elijah deliberately causing the 450 prophets of Baal to make their final transition on that day into eternity. Message: don't mess with God or his prophets. I want to talk to you about parental timing versus a child's time. I recall a time when my son asked me for ice cream, which by itself wasn't a big deal or a bad thing, but he had already eaten full meals and he had many treats in between. I told him, no, not now, maybe later. I thought I was saving him from a tummy ache. Do you know this little boy had a fit? He folded his arms and he stopped talking to me. Well, after 10 minutes, I gave in. So he ate the ice cream, and sure enough, 15 minutes after eating it, he got a tummy ache. I said, see, I told you so. But then I had to ask him, did you really get mad at me over some ice cream? Come on, man. You see, at the time he asked for the ice cream, he was looking at the event from his current child's time. For my part, using my parental timing, I saw the ice cream as one small event out of many events in that day. I think what we all see is he needed time to digest what I'd already given him. While ice cream is not bad for him, it wasn't good for him at that time. And I also wanted him to understand that receiving things from me is not about the things. I don't want to be the purveyor of things. It is about relationship, our relationship. In my parental timing, I have a future mindset and I look back at him. I look at the events after he had the ice cream. I look at the ice cream event and the events prior to the ice cream. You see, my son, in his child's time, in his position facing the future, could only see the ice cream event. He couldn't see where he was at the present moment, and he couldn't see the events that led up to that moment. I need him to know that his entire life is bigger than that one event, and so is our relationship. So as parents, we know that sometimes that thing that our child really, really wants, we might have to attach a lesson that we really, really want them to learn, even if the two things are not related. Do you see where I'm going with this? We realize that we're going to get our child's attention, and they would likely work hard to achieve the goal. All right, before we leave, let's do some extra credit. Let's go back to the beginning. In the beginning, there was a void or nothing, right? And God says, let there be light. At the moment that light is created and enters that void, space, the universe, is born. And for light's part, do you know that light in space, uninterrupted, can travel forever? You can look that up. But our space-based telescopes can see explosions of stars that happened billions of years ago, just because of the light that that explosion emitted at that time. So there is light that has traveled 13 billion years ago that we're now seeing today. That is the same light that God created. Remember, I just told you, light can travel indefinitely. Einstein said that time and space are two sides of the same coin. You cannot have one without the other. And so when God creates space, he also creates time. They are the precursors of the universe. So God is not the universe, as some people would have you to believe. That is not his name. God is no more the universe than I am the sandwich that I created this morning. Look, you can call me Sean, you can call me Abrams, you can call me Abrams Rising or AR, but you cannot call me Sandwich. I told you, I'm from New York City. We don't subscribe to statistics. You only get one chance. If you want patterns, you need to go to Chicago. I'm Abrams, you're awesome. I'll see you in the next 5 minutes.